this is Chase Utley, and this is the Phillies Show.
Hi, everybody. Ruben Amaro Jr., Jim Salisbury, Todd Zalecki here. We are brought to you by the Foul Territory Network. It's Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. Hard to believe, but it's been almost 3 weeks since the Phillies played their last game, that Game 4 loss to the Mets in New York in the NL Division Series. Since then, there's been a lot of talk, of course, about the future of the Phillies. The next several weeks and months will shape the future of the Phillies. And a big part of that future, of course, is the Phillies farm system. They're going to need some of their prospects to step up and play significant roles next season and beyond to keep this window open as long as humanly possible. And so who better to talk about the farm system than Phillies assistant general manager of player development, Preston Mattingly. Ruben, Jim, and I caught up with him earlier and chatted about all those top Phillies prospects, from Andrew Painter to Aidan Miller to Justin Crawford and more. Hope you guys are going to enjoy this. This episode is brought to you by Shibe Vintage Sports. Get your unique throwback Phillies tees, hats, and sweatshirts from local artists at their shops in Center City, Wayne, and Westchester, and at shibesports.com. Here's our interview with Preston. Preston, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate the time. Kind of an interesting part of the year. World Series is going on right now. And, Jim, Ruben, and I are watching the World Series. And we were thinking that this World Series, you might feel differently about this World Series than anybody because you got like connections to both teams, like you grew up, your dad playing for the Yankees, you played in the Dodgers system, you worked for the Dodgers. So do you watch this World Series any differently, or are you kind of so far removed from those things that you just watch it as a fan?
Watching as a fan, I'm definitely pretty far removed, but I definitely wish it was the Phillies playing. So I think you still watch it with a little bit of just man, I wish this was us. But I definitely think it's good for baseball. Two great teams. It's been an entertaining series so far.
So Preston, Jim and I were talking yesterday about having you on, and we were talking about all the different guys we wanted to talk about. And we were saying how 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was probably only, maybe a handful of guys that we were really kind of truly excited about. But I feel like now it's, you could talk about 25, 30 guys that have some sort of level of intrigue. And I'm wondering how you feel about the state of the system since you've gotten here and kind of where it is now.
Yeah, I think anytime you run in the minor leagues, you always want to be better. You're always searching for better and make things more efficient and more volume of players. Like you mentioned, interesting guys, different tiers, what we kind of call them internally. But I think the credit for the turnaround the system would go to Brian Barber, a lot of our acquisition team, whether it's Brian Barber on the domestic side, Sal Agustinelli, Georgie Volandia, Derek Chung on the international side, and then our acquisition team in the office of Corinne Landry, Trey Barr, Ani Kalambi, his group as well. Just it's always a team effort of getting players in, and we've been really aggressive in a lot of different avenues, whether it's minor league Rule 5, searching for players. We're constantly looking to upgrade our system, and I think we've slowly but surely done that. And I think we're not where we want to be yet, right? That's not a secret. And I think we're going to continue to try and build this thing internally. And hopefully, you mentioned 2025, hopefully a couple of years from now, it's 30, 35, and then we get 40 and 50 and just keep growing from there.
So Preston, as Todd said, there are a number of really interesting names, and it's no secret that Andrew Painter is kind of near the top of that list, maybe even at the top of that list. He's in the Arizona Fall League now. What are your days like peeking in on him? Are you watching video? How are you keeping in touch with him? And how do you think he's doing?
Yeah, I've gotten to see, obviously living down here in Florida and Andy being here for a year plus rehabbing, I've got to see his rehab firsthand, whether that's him throwing his first bullpen, playing catch for the first time, the live BPs building up, the sim games, and now I feel like we kind of passed him along over to Arizona and get to watch him on video. We've sent a bunch of people out there to watch him. And yeah, I kind of track him through, text. We'll communicate through text or phone calls, and then just watch him in our internal system on the video we have. He's obviously so far, it felt like asking somebody it's a pretty high level to jump to after not being competitive baseball for almost 2 years. I think he's held his own. The stuff's continued to trend really well. The command is trended upwards as he's gotten more, more innings under his belt, more pitches. And honestly, I think he's just scratching the surface of who he's going to be. I think he's a special talent, a special kid from a work ethic standpoint, and he has the pitch mix and the weapons to get guys out now. It's just, to me, refining that and being consistent on a day-to-day basis.
I'm sure you're going to be asked this like 100 times over the next few months, and you're probably not even there yet in terms of finalizing the plan for him for next year. But is there anything you can offer on where you guys stand on that and what you are thinking in terms of, the 2025 season and whether you turn them loose or whether you go easy with them? How does that all shape up here as, we reach the end of October?
Yeah, I think we haven't finalized anything as a group. I know we're going to sit down with a lot of different departments, whether that's medical, our strength conditioning side, our performance group. Obviously, Dave Dombrowski, our front office, will be a big decision maker, a big cog in that. So I think we haven't finalized anything yet. But honestly, a kid coming off Tommy John, there's going to be somewhat of limitations. I think we have to sit down as a group and find out the best way to utilize his innings. And I think we'll do that here in the short term. If
he's healthy and feeling good and pitching well, do you expect to see him in the big leagues sometime next year?
I think he has the talent to do that, right? So, and he has the stuff's good enough right now. So I think it's a matter of, to me, with him, is just getting consistent. I do think there is some piece of it of when you miss 2 years of competition, jumping back into that it's going to be an adjustment for him. And especially at an upper level, whether it's AA, AAA, or even the major leagues, there's going to be some adjustment period to him getting back into high-level competition, just little things of daily routine and just getting back into it. It's going to take a toll on him. And I think we're going to be cognizant of his workload, throughout that.
Preston, I've seen him a couple of years ago. I saw and I'm big on makeup and like the sort of the intangible things. The thing that impressed me the most about him was his PFPs and how he sort of held himself. And I'm big on face. I love his face. I love the way he kind of goes about his business. Can you tell us, is there somebody you can compare him to? Can you talk a little bit about his makeup and why I think that's going to be I feel that's going to be a little bit of a difference maker for him?
Yeah, I think you touched on it. I think first thing I'll speak on the makeup. Just from the time we got him, he's been driven to get better every single day, like a lot of our players. But Andy stood out just from a sense of, he's 6'8", he's throwing the ball mid to upper 90s, and he repeats his delivery almost like he's 6'1", 6'2". And I think when you see him in his what I call his space, which is the mound and his kind of circle, he's really athletic, and he fields his position well. He controls the running game really well. And I think he doesn't scare at all. He's going to keep coming after hitters. Whether he gives up a solo home run, the next one's going to be right after guys. That's what I've always been impressed with Andy is he's not going to back down no matter who's in the box. He's on the attack 24/7. And I think that speaks to how he's made and how his competitive makeup is. And I think in terms of who to compare him to, I don't have a definite comparison. Obviously, I got drafted with Kershaw and got to see him work. I think those two are just completely different. They're wired completely different. I think both are uber competitive. I think they both come off differently. And I think Andy is a little bit, he's still very young, but he's a little bit goofy at times where Clayton was very serious, especially on his pitch days. And it was almost like he's ready to kill you. And obviously Andy's the same way, but they just go about it in different mindsets.
Preston, I remember that. Were you there the day 2 springs ago where there was a live BP on one of the backfields and Schwarber took him deep? Were you watching that?
I was up in the tower.
Okay, so Schwarber hits his bomb to right field, and Schwarber just kind of gallops down the first base line. And Andy had the best reaction. He handled it so well. He kind of tilted his head back and just laughed "Oh man, I can't believe you got me." And I think that kind of, to me, that showed something, that he wasn't rattled by it, that he took it in stride. I mean, I imagine that's kind of what you're talking about a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I think he, even saw in AA, and as he was kind of working his way up the ladder, where if there was an outing where he may have struggled a little bit, whether it's a command standpoint or even getting hit around, the next outing, the next hitter, it's always right after him. And there was never any of well, I need to make these changes. It was more just, no, I just need to attack more. And if they can hit my stuff, good for them. I'm going to keep coming after them. That's kind of his mindset, and it's been fun to watch.
Preston, when a kid like that who has so much talent and such a bright future misses a couple years and now he's feeling good, how much of a challenge is it on you and other team officials, instructors, and whatnot to just calm down his enthusiasm, and maybe pull the reins in a little bit and convince him that, yeah, you're doing great, but we need to exercise a little caution here? Is that a big challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always. It's funny you mentioned that. After his last outing in the Arizona Fall League, I got a text from a guy that works closely with me in PD and said, "Hey, you're gonna have to slow people down on this guy because he looks like he's in mid-year form here in his third inning here in the Fall League." So I definitely think it's something when you get a guy that's that talented and is that close to the major leagues, it's just human nature to want to, talk about him being in the big league rotation and things of that sort. But I think you have to me, as an organization, we have to do a good job of tempering expectations, making sure people realize Andy is still a kid. He's still working through his delivery, his stuff, and let him develop. To me, you can't rush development, and let him develop at his pace. And then to me, when he gets there, is hopefully he's there to stay.
So I wanted to know, Preston, I know there's obviously some players, Aidan Miller and Crawford and Tait and Kaba. If you were going to say there's a strength in your organization, is it on the mound? Is it position player wise? Is it a little combination of both? Where are your strengths and weaknesses you think you have in your organization?
Yeah, I think right now I'd say our strength is in the infield. You mentioned a few guys. I think there's even some guys like the second tier, like some medium tier players that people don't know as much about that I think they should and they will hear coming soon. You mentioned, Aidan Miller. You mentioned Starlin Caba. Brian Rincon's a guy that, we're very high on. He's out in the Fall League now. Plus defender at shortstop, puts together really quality at bats. Has not shown the surface performance yet, but a lot of the underlying stuff's very good. You mentioned Starlin Caba. Another guy, Arun Escobar, kind of came on the scenes this year before he had a lower leg injury that kind of set him back. A guy that we're very high on. Other, externally teams are very high on. So I would say infield, I think, is the strength. But I also think, we've done a pretty good job of outing outfielders. So as I say that, I'm sitting here and thinking about our outfield guys. And you mentioned Justin Crawford and Dante Nori we took in the first round, Griffin Burkholter in the second round. I mean, you kind of have a good mix of both. And I think the one area I would say where not a weakness, but I feel like we just haven't spent a ton of draft capital is the catching spot. Obviously, Tait's a big prospect, and I think he's got a bright future ahead, but he just turned 18 years old. So he's a guy that's a few years away. And I think Sal and his group on the international side have done a really nice job of identifying some of these catchers, whether that's Guillermo Rosario, Angel Mata, Leo Farabus, some young kids. And do I know who's going to be the best, out of that group? To be honest with you, no, because they're all I think very talented. But I think it's always good to have some strength in numbers down at the lower levels and see who pops through.
Tait is super.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Tait? I'm sorry, Todd.
Yeah.
I hear so many good things about him.
Yeah, Eduardo's a guy that I still remember going to the DR and kind of watching our new signees, and all of our guys are working on the field, hitting the cage. And I remember, because about the different profiles of guys. Hey, this Caba is a very high profile player. He signed for X and he's ranked this, and you always know internally what these guys are. And I remember seeing Tait hitting the cage, and I remember turning to Georgie Valandia and being like, "Georgie, have you seen this guy?" And we kind of both looked at each other and we had both seen him, but I think he had taken such a big step, even in the couple months after he agreed to when he arrived at the complex. And we were kind of both like, wow, this bat looks like it's real. It was extremely loud in the cage. He has a really sound swing. And I think we kind of looked at each other and we're like, well, if he can catch, he's going to be a really interesting prospect. And it's turned out that this kid is extremely intelligent. He knows what he needs to work on and get better at. He's hungry to learn and do those things. And I think we've seen, even being the 17-year-old kid that he is, he's taken big steps forward on the receiving side this year. And we think he's going to stay behind the plate. And if he can stay behind the plate, it's a hit power combo, a guy that's going to be a force in the middle of the lineup.
Yeah, he showed really well, right, with the Threshers this season when you promoted him, didn't he? I mean, you must be pretty encouraged by what you saw, considering he is 18 and most of these guys are a couple years older at least.
Yeah, we really want to challenge a lot of our younger guys. And Tait started that breakout series game over in Lakeland, and as a 17-year-old, he essentially played the full season. I think the last maybe few weeks of the year, he just turned 18, but we thought he could handle it. And just the at-bat quality, and like strength is not an issue. Usually with young kids, strength can be a little bit of an issue. With him, it's not. And he's got a chance to be special. And I think the one thing with him is just almost reining him in to understand that you can't hit everything, and you got to understand what pitchers are trying to do to you as you get older and move the ladder, and strike zone discipline and understand where you can do damage. And I think once he gets that final piece, he's going to be a guy that, and I know everybody kind of knows about him now, but it'll be nationally known amongst everybody.
Preston, you talked about challenging, and I was just kind of curious what your own personal thought process is, what your philosophy is on pushing guys or holding them back. Is it something that's individual? Is it something that that you as an organization want to do? How do you guys, and I think a lot of fans would like to know, like, how aggressive are the Phillies, or how controlled is your system, and how you go about moving guys and how they matriculate through the system?
I think it's an individual basis, Ruben. I mean, I think one thing we talk about a lot is, like, you have the answer key to your players. Their makeup, their work ethic, the things they excel at and the things they need to work on. So I think we like to push our guys, but we like to do it in a strategic way. So let's just give a couple examples. So like an Aidan Miller, a guy that started in low A this year, finished the year in double A. And some people would say it's aggressive, pushing the kid his first full year out to double A. But I think we do that because we felt as an organization that getting him to double A will help, not necessarily expose, but like highlight a few things that we felt like he needs to work on. And then when he sees those things with his makeup, he's going to want to attack those full force in the offseason. So it almost builds his development plan for him by challenging him and putting him against upper level pitching, and putting him on the field at shortstop against, maybe it's a little bit faster runners, and understanding the speed of the game at a higher level. All those things to me go into when you move guys, when you don't. And I think it's just a case by case basis. And obviously you saw, the year prior, Orion Kirkering, maybe he started, and I'll take the blame for that. He started at a level where he shouldn't have been at in low A, but I think we showed as an organization that we're not scared to move guys. And if we felt he could help our major league team, we'll keep moving them until they get to that level. And that's what Orion did. So I think it's definitely case by case, and knowing the player's makeup and things that go into that help answer those questions for you. But I think we want to be aggressive. And I think we'll continue to show that going forward.
Are there certain markers that you feel like certain players have to have, whether they're a pitcher or a position player? Or there's certain things that, okay, once we feel like they can do X, we can then move them to Y? Or is it, again, sort of a fluid situation for you?
I think it's fluid, but I think you have metrics that you track. Like you just say on the hitting side, let's say a guy's, zone contact or just chase rate. It's been very public, right? And just exit velocity, how hard they hit it, right? So if you take those three things and they're performing at the top of the league, or where you feel like, hey, this is in a really good spot, we need to challenge him at the next level to see if this is sustainable the way he's doing it. I think we use a lot of different markers in that regard, just to see of hey, where his metrics are at and where he's trending. And then on the flip side of that, if a guy's really struggling, maybe their surface performance is very good and their underlying, maybe it's poor and lacking, we could also do a flip side and move them to another level to get the player to buy into what we're trying to get them to work on, and see it firsthand, to where if you get to a higher level, you may get exposed a little bit of what you need to work on. And then to me, it's easier for us to build a plan for that player for an improvement plan.
How, Preston, you mentioned chase rate's been public. Dave talked about it in his breakup press conference. Rob Thompson talked about it. Talked about maybe staying on the ball longer, using the whole field as a potential solution or area for improvement on the chase. How do you approach chase rate and improving it at the minor league level? What do you stress? Are there any strategies for improving a guy's chase rate so when he gets to the big leagues, he's a more selective hitter?
So I think I'd take a step back and say, I think you acquire it. And in the draft, internationally, I think there's a lot of different things you can track to see how a guy sees the ball. A lot of different, training you can put guys through to track how they see the ball. There's so much data in colleges when you draft players of what guys do. So I think you can definitely acquire that. I think once you get them in the system, I think it's very hard to flip an extreme to the opposite side of the extreme. Like if a guy's let's just use a 40% chase rate in college. To me, if I'm going in, it's going to be very tough to get him to be a 20% chase rate guy in the minor leagues. But competition's going to get better. So I think it's hard to ask that of a player. But I think what we can do is take skill sets that we value, players who see the ball, make a certain amount of contact, and then to me, it's easier to when you get them in the minor leagues to coach them and develop them on that and train them on we obviously have a lot of resources at our disposal, whether that's the trajectory machine, which is about as realistic as you can get from a pitching machine standpoint, and just put them through game at bats, simulations, constantly communicating with them, with its coaching staff about approach, about what you're trying to do with pitchers. And then also the game planning aspect has gotten so big. And I think it's getting players to understand what you're looking for, when you're looking for it. It's a fine line of not giving them too much, but educating them on what pitchers are trying to do to them so they can help make the best decisions possible when they get in the box.
Another thing that Dave talked about a couple of weeks ago was the importance of starting pitching depth. And he cited, the struggles in that number 5 spot down the stretch. Inability to kind of put up consistent numbers. And I'm wondering where you feel like the starting pitching depth is in the higher levels in terms of their chances to step up and maybe, perform better than expected or better than they did last year. I'm talking about, I guess, Tyler Phillips. I don't know if you'd call him a prospect because he's been up. I guess you still could, but Mick Abel, Moises Chase, Seth Johnson, where do you kind of see those guys right now in terms of their development and ability to help, if not next year, then the year after that?
Well, I think first off, you can never have enough pitching depth, as everybody knows. Just with the injuries as high as they are in today's game, I think we've been very fortunate as an organization over the last couple of years of our starting pitching health. Guys, for the most part, have stayed healthy, taking the ball. So I think just mention the guys or talking about the guys you mentioned. I think we're very high on Seth Johnson. I know he came up and struggled in a very short sample there in Miami, but we think he's a guy that can help us going forward. And then Mick Abel, I know he's been very public of some of the struggles Mick went through this year. Honestly, I think it's going to be good for him in the long run. Some of the things he had to go through. And I think we do tend to forget he is a 22-year-old in AAA. And honestly, the way the game's trended, the major leagues in AAA, it's a pretty wide gap now, just the talent level. And I think getting Mick to that upper level using Major League Baseballs with ABS, it's a big adjustment for him. And I think a lot of struggles that were public throughout the year, we know he's made for that. And I think there were some adjustments that came later to where he continued to trend up throughout the season with his stuff. We think he's going to be a piece of what we're doing going forward. And then the second piece of that Gregory Soto trade, Moises Chase, is a guy to me that has the stuff now to compete the big leagues. It's just refining. And the fastball is special. He's got a sweeper, a cutter, and a changeup. It's a lot of finer points with him we're trying to do, like holding runners. The overall strike throwing is not quite where it needs to be. But I think, to me, he's a guy where if he takes that next step from a command standpoint, it's not going to matter as much the hitters. It's going to matter of him getting the ball over the plate consistently. Because if he does that, he's going to have real success. Yeah,
he was a guy where running into some scouts in the press box late in the season, they seemed to be, wow, this guy. Chase, the Phillies are really lucky they got him, and you sound like you had that similar excitement about his potential.
Yeah, so I got to see a couple of his starts down the stretch, and I was fortunate to see the one in Somerset where he went 6 innings and I think 84 pitches and struck out 14. And it honestly looked like men amongst boys. And he had a lineup. He was facing John Birdie and Anthony Rizzo was in the lineup. And the Yankees do a good job with hitters in the minor leagues. They always have a good group, and he went right through them. And it just showed that was probably his high, but if that's the high, we'll take it. And I definitely think it'll be good enough when he gets to the major leagues too. And the another thing about him too is he's 21 years old and he's somewhat new to pitching with the amount of mileage he has on his arm, but he's not scared either. and he's going to keep coming after you, and he has the stuff. Like we said, if we can harness that and get him in the zone, that he has a chance to pitch for a long time. And I think one thing we did with Moises was when we got him, he had pitched in a little bit of the piggyback system with Baltimore. We wanted to get him a consistent role and let him build on his routine. So we moved him just to the starting where he was a consistent starter week in, week out, just to try and dial in his routines, his in-between start lifts, things like that, to where he could get a consistent foundation built going forward on the starting side.
Preston, I wanted to talk about that starting stuff and developing starting pitchers. Has been obviously a lot of talk about, whether it's, having enough starting pitching depth and being able to get starters who can go longer and longer into the game. They're thinking about making changes even at a much higher level than all of us about having the starters pitch more. What is your philosophy? I know it's a very delicate thing because certain guys are not necessarily coming out of college or have a ton of innings, and some guys are you're really careful with. The guys are coming off injuries, et cetera, et cetera. But what's your philosophy? And are you trying to get those guys stretched out longer? Are you trying to prepare some of those starters for those types of roles later on in their major league career?
Yeah, I think first off, like I know there's been a lot of changes that we talked about that have been very public. I hope they don't make those changes, because I think that would be killing I honestly think it would kill the starting pitcher. I think if you want starters, you got to develop them as starters. And to be honest with you, as an industry, we're guilty as well of, we chase stuff. We chase guys, getting into higher end velocities. And usually what that means is you throw them in shorter stints. I think as an organization and as an industry, we have to be willing to let guys pitch deep into game, knowing that, hey, their stuff may not grade out quite as well. They may not be throwing quite as hard, and that's okay. Because if we do that consistently and we get them through 5 and 6 and 7 innings and we get workload under their belt, I'm not smart enough to know if it will help injuries, but I have a feeling that if we get guys to where they're consistently in consistent routines, going deeper into games in the minor leagues, that when they get to the big leagues and they have 100 innings, 120 innings, 130 innings under their belt, it will help decrease some of the injuries we have at the big league level once guys get there and they've only thrown 30, 40 innings, and then we're asking them to go face world-class hitters and, oh, by the way, double and triple your workload. It's just, to me, it's not sustainable. And as an industry, we have to be willing to develop these guys as starters and let them pitch deep into games responsibly, but pitch deep into games and do it consistently. That was my rant on the pitching side.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. No, I'm glad, man, that fires me up, because I think that I think there's been a trend to go the other way, and I really do think it's. I mean, at the end of the day, I think you're putting a workload on the bullpens and others, and the domino effect associated with not going deeper into games and having starters go consistently 6 or 7 innings. I think it's made it even more difficult for sustainability.
Yeah, I think you've seen our organization. It's something we really believe in, is our starting pitchers going deep into games. So that whether it's the big league level, you can go and track all through the minor leagues. A lot of our kids, whether they're 19, 20, they're throwing 100+ innings in the minor leagues. And we think that's really valuable for them, whether that's just getting out there on the mound, working on their craft. Like, that helps with the running game. That helps with, understanding how to slow the game down at times when you've been out there in the 5th, 6th, 7th inning to know what to expect. And then when you do get to the major leagues and you're out there in the 6th inning, it's like, oh, I've been here before. Now I know what I need to do, versus it's foreign to these guys when they get out there in the 4th inning. It's like, what do you expect is going to happen if they've never done it at the minor leagues? Like, what do you think is going to happen at the major league level?
Are there kids that you encounter, maybe new kids in the system, that feel like, I pitched 4 innings, I pitched 5 innings, I did my job, and do you have to convince them that, there's another plateau you need to go to be considered a legit starting pitcher in the major leagues? No,
I think guys want to pitch. I think guys want to stay out there as long as possible. You may get a one-off, but I think for the most part, look, I can only speak for our players, but I know, you got to rip the ball out of our guys' hands at times, and they want to be out there, and I love that about them. So I think, I can only speak for our organization, but I know our guys want to pitch deep into games.
Preston, Griff McGarry is in the fall league, and it's the fall league, but I noticed he's made 2 starts. He moved into a reliever role. What's kind of going on with him? Is there any reason behind him starting, or is it just, hey, it's a fall league and we want to get him a routine? Is it as simple as that, or is there something more there?
Yeah, Griff's the guy. Obviously, it's been a starter kind of his whole tenure here with us in the Phillies, and we had built a pretty good workload on him. And last year we had kind of transitioned him to more of a reliever, and we had worked on some different things from an arm path standpoint to try and shorten him up a little bit. And we did that with his arm, and we threw him in shorter stints. Honestly, it's more of a workload thing now. I think now that the arm stroke's where we want it to be, we felt it's time to kind of make him more versatile and lengthen his rollout. And we know he can start. It's just, to me, with Griff, it's very similar to Moises. It's just the command aspect of it, of getting him in the strike zone. And we've seen, honestly, as a starter, at times it's been better than as a reliever. So it's always going to be that guy that's going to, more of a stuff starter. It's going to use a lot of his pitches in 4 or 5 innings, but that's still valuable as well. And, I think keeping his options open out in the fall league, he's obviously pitched very well in his 2 or 3 outings. So hopefully we can continue that, throughout the rest of the fall and then bring him into spring training. To me, I think we have not sat down as an organization to finalize everything, but to me, like, we can go either way now at that point. If we wanted to move to lengthen him out, making him a full-time starter, we could do that. If we wanted to keep him short in that, when I say short, that multi-inning reliever, we can do that as well.
So, Preston, we hear so much about Aidan Miller. You referenced his name earlier. Can you just tell us what makes him special, in your eyes, having now witnessed him for a full season and a half?
Yeah, I think what makes him special is like his work ethic, first off, and like who he is. Like, from the second he got into our organization, it's been like on a mission to get better and prove people wrong of where he got picked, prove people wrong in the fact that he can play shortstop, and just ultimately, like, he knows where he wants to go, and he's like consistently asking questions and challenging us to, like, hey, get me there quicker. And honestly, sometimes, like, we have to pull the reins back on him a little bit because he can get a little bit moving pretty fast. And, 3 days after the season, he's wanting to be full go, taking infield out, in a Carpenter Complex. But I think it's a good problem to have. He's extremely driven. He's an extremely hardworking kid. He's very intelligent. And he has all the tools necessary to be a very good big leaguer for a long time. So that's kind of what makes him special. He's very, like, intelligent on the field. He's a great person. Just, like, to me, Aidan's the total package. And I always sometimes hesitate to, kind of pump up our guys in the media, but with Aidan, it doesn't bother me at all because I know, what he's looking to do, and none of this stuff, whether he's performing well or he's struggling a little bit, he never changes. He's pretty even keel and he knows what he wants to do.
You mentioned when you promoted him to Reading, you wanted to really push him because you felt he was ready, and that you felt that anything that maybe cropped up in Reading would kind of help him figure out his off-season plan. What might have popped up that he might be working on this offseason that he might have learned about himself in Reading that he hopes maybe he can take to the next level next year?
Yeah, so he got hurt and didn't get to play as much as we would have liked. But I'll just take a step back even to Jersey. Like, he had struggled a little bit for the first time probably in his career ever for the first month there in Jersey. And honestly, it was more just surface numbers. And everything underlying was better in Jersey than it was in Clearwater, which was kind of interesting to us. Of like, we didn't really know why he was struggling. I think there was a few things, Aidan, from like a mentality standpoint, and like a few small swing things that Luke Merton, our director of hitting, went in and talked to him about. And honestly, since that time, he kind of clicked, and we felt it was more just about Aidan getting at bats versus higher level pitching versus fixing swings or making adjustments. We felt like we had made the necessary adjustments, and it was now time for him to just go play and just learn pitching and work on his, what he's trying to do with pitchers along that line versus like actually making true like swing adjustments. And we know there'll be more things along the way, but we felt his swing, from a mental standpoint, he was in a very good spot. And it was time for him to face some high level pitching in there in Reading.
As far as his position is concerned, I mean, what if you were to just look at him as a scout and as an evaluator, what position on the field do you think is his best position, and what position or positions do you feel like he can play?
Yeah, I think obviously you guys have done some scouting too. When you look at Aidan, he screams third base, right? Just like the size, the lower half's very strong. And he just looks like that prototypical, just strong-bodied third baseman. But I think when you see him move around and you see kind of the side-to-side, he can throw from different arm strokes. He turns the double play really well. You start to see him and you're like, I think he can play shortstop. So I think you mentioned which position. I think, to me also, like when I mentioned turn the double play, like second base is an option. But I'd say third base, shortstop, and second base to me are the 3 options. As you know, a lot of times in the games, like when you get called up, it's circumstance, and that's where we need somebody. And whether that's shortstop, third base, second base, I think Aidan will be equipped to do all three. I think just the profiles differently, right? If you get Aidan at second base, he's a power hitting on base machine who is going to put together great at bats. At shortstop, he's kind of that, he's kind of always that, like what I just described, but like you kind of look for different things in different positions, whether that's defense versus offense, and he profiles at all three. So I think to answer your question, I kind of danced around a little bit, Ruben, but to answer, I think he could play any of those three. And I think, we're going to keep him at shortstop for as long as possible, but also start to layer in some other positions now that he's at the upper levels, knowing that, hey, if something happens and we need a spot or we need him to be able to play third base, we don't want the first time him doing that to be in the major leagues.
Wow. One guy we touched on real briefly earlier was Justin Crawford, and Dave Dombrowski a couple weeks ago said, I think the quote was something like, he's coming fast. We think he's coming fast. Why do you think he's coming fast towards the big leagues? Besides his talent, obviously, but what's really jumped out at you over this past year that makes you feel like he might be getting close?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind with Justin is how prepared this kid is. And honestly, like the where he grew up with his dad, he got to probably watch it firsthand. But Justin is as buttoned up on his routines, his hamstring program, his maintenance programs as any player we have. And that's at 19 and 20 years old. So I think when you get a kid who's that talented and he's as buttoned up as he is on his routines and what he needs to work on, I think then you just start to throw out like, hey, he's a 70, 80 runner with elite bat to ball skills and he can play center field and he's going to be an impact force on the bases. Like, it's obviously very intriguing. There's been some well-known stuff, thrown around about Justin, about his ground ball rate. I personally think like as he gets older and gets more mature, that's going to continue to trend down. But I would also say like he's a guy that his profile is always going to be more conducive to we want more balls on the ground. But I think, people look at Justin as a kind of a singles type hitter. I don't see that at all. I think this kid's going to have real power. And, he's already shown some upper end exit velocities and ability to drive the ball to the opposite field. And a lot of his stuff with his quality of contact is just a byproduct of like him catching the ball so deep. And as he learns to catch the ball out in front a little bit more, I think he'll get the ball in the air and on the line more naturally. So, yeah, we're very high on Justin, and another tremendous kid who Brian Barber and his staff did a great job of identifying makeup, tools, and talent. And, yeah, he's going to be a fun one for Philadelphia fans to watch.
Man, if he hits the ball on the line, a lot of balls in the gap, I'm seeing a lot of doubles and triples, I'm sure you
Every
are as well.
It's a triple as soon as it hits that gap. So he's got that kind of impact potential.
And when I look at the Phillies center field position over many, many years, there's been a lot of transition. It's almost been a turnstile out there. And he looks like the type of kid who could, when he gets here, lock it down for a good long time. And that's something they haven't had in a long time in center field, middle of the diamond position. That's so important. You see this kid as having a long career once he gets here?
Yeah, I think that's the hope, right? He's a guy that we feel very confident in his ability to play center field, to hit at the top of the order. And obviously he needs to keep progressing like we think he can. But, with the tools and the skill set that he has, I don't see any reason why this kid's not playing in the major leagues for a long time.
Preston, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about just overall, like the Phillies philosophy. I know there's organizations that have like the Dodgers way and the Cardinals way and stuff like that. Is there still a Phillies way? Is it something that I know you probably have a player development manual or what have you? Can you talk a little bit about, that fundamental part of what you're doing?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about what we call protect the standard. And what goes into that, honestly, is just four things that require no talent. And what we try and preach with all of our players is like talentless things, right? Like how we respect each other, the game, teammates, staff, how we prepare, how we play, and how we compete. So it's those four things. None of them take any talent. We preach it day in, day out. Our players know it. Our staff know it. And we try and push those things knowing that Brian Barber and his scouting staff, they're gonna sign players with big tools and big talent. And so is Sal on the international side with Georgie and Derek Chung. We're going to continue to bring those players in. So we've chosen the route of really preaching things that you can control, knowing that the talent's going to come in, and it's just, to me, maintaining or growing that talent as it gets there. So I wouldn't say we have like, hey, this is the Philly way of how we're going to do this, But what we have is our standard of how we do things, and we don't deviate from it.
That's awesome. Preston, thanks a lot for the time, man.
Yeah, it was awesome.
This was fun.
This is great stuff, man.
We could talk, ask you about 10, like I said, 10, 15 other guys. We didn't even touch on Devin Saltibon and some of these other guys that are coming up through the system that has everybody excited. There's Rincones, there's a whole bunch of guys. Let me ask you this one last question. I'll let you go. Who would be your under the radar guys, or is there an under the radar guy? I don't know if that's putting you on the spot or not, but is there an under the radar guy that comes to mind that you're like, man, I cannot believe people are not talking about this dude?
I'll give you a couple. You just mentioned, I'll give you one outfielder, one infielder. And
Okay.
One of them's like how you mentioned Rincones. I think he's an under the radar guy from the simple standpoint of he's going to have top of the scale power. He's a better defender than people think. He's maybe one of our best base runners, and he controls the zone really well. So he may be that kind of true. I think he's a better hitter than this, but the three true outcome guy who gets on base, has real power, and to me has the ability to play at least average, maybe a tick above average major league corner outfield. He's going to be a quality base runner for you. He'll get you 20 to 25 bags just off instincts alone. And I personally still think there's a good enough hitter in there where he's not one of those, low average type guys. So
Okay.
I think he's got a chance to impact the major leagues here coming soon if he continues to progress. And then the one infielder I would give you was Arun Escobar. Starling Caba and Eduardo Tait get a lot of the hype, which is well deserved. Arun Escobar kind of flew under the radar on our FCL team, and part of it was because he went down with an injury, a lower leg injury. But he's a guy that has real power. He controls the zone. He's a plus defender, maybe at second and third base, and he's strong. Man, this kid is strong, and he loves to play. And so I think he's a guy to me we plan on starting him in the full season next year. And I think people will start to see him as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid that can play a couple spots in the infield, controls the zone, is really good at bat quality. And we think there's going to be real power potential in there. So he'd be a little bit of a sleeper for me as well.
Okay.
Nice.
Awesome. Thanks, Preston.
Thanks so much for your time, man. We know it's not an easy time. I know you guys got a lot of stuff going on, so we appreciate it.
Yeah,
Hey, you guys have me on anytime. This was fun. Love talking about our players.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks again to Preston for the time. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Ruben, Jim, and I will be back later this week. The Philly Show is brought to you by the Foul Territory Network. Subscribe to The Philly Show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you like us, give us a review. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook, and Threads. Find Ruben's analysis before, during, and after Phillies games on NBC Sports Philadelphia, on the Sports Radio 94 WIP Morning Show, and MLB Network. Find Jim at allphly.com. Find me at MLB.com, the Phillies Beat newsletter, and MLB Network.